Okay, we're going to talk about the origin of DNA, DNA's origin, and it's talking about metaphysically, where did it come from? And that's a big question. We know it's passed on every generation, but metaphysically means where did it come from originally? Well, you have to look at it with forensic science, look at it metaphysically, and it's a mixture of science and history. You collect data, fingerprints, DNA samples, etc., and science looks at that and they develop those. And then you make a story that fits the data, put it all together, and that's what a detective does. And then some stories, histories, will fit better than others, and that's what I'm going to do tonight. Show that my story that I came up in my investigation fits better than others. And we're going to look at DNA, and I'm going to look at it basically the way that a homicide detective looks at a dead body. And when you look at a dead body, there's four different ways that it would have died. The first was a natural death and by disease or something like that. The second is an accident where they fall off a ladder or fall through a roof or something. And the third is suicide. When when you have those first three, it's all within the room. All the evidence is within the room. But if you have the fourth, which is a homicide, unless you have the homicide suspect inside the room, you're going to have to make an investigation and look for that outside suspect. And so I look for the outside suspect, and I'll tell you who I found for the origin of DNA. And that was Jehovah God Almighty. And Revelation 4, verse 11 says, "You are worthy, Jehovah our God, to receive the glory and the honor and the power, because you created all things, and because your will, they came together into existence and were created." So this is the suspect I had, but it's the only outside suspects. The other suspects were all inside, and I categorize them as materialistic. And materialistic is the universe is all there is and all there ever will be and ever was. And this everything's in the universe. It's all part of the material universe. It's not like the materialists in Christianity where they love money and everything. This is the material world is all there is. So this is all inside the room. It's the material world. And here's a quote: "What many take to be a conflict between religion or creation, I would say, and science is really something else. It is a conflict between creation and materialism. Materialism regards itself as scientific and indeed is often called scientific materialism, even by its opponents, but it has no legitimate claim to be part of science. It is a materialistic philosophy. It's not science at all." And here's a quote from Richard Llewellyn. He says, "Science allows no divine foot in the door. No outside cause," basically, is what he's saying. And he told the truth here. I'm sure he didn't like it afterwards, after all the creationists got it, but here's what he said when he told the truth: "We take the side of science in spite of the patently absurdity of some of its constructs." So he takes the side of materialistic philosophy because we have a prior commitment to materialism. He recognizes that. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept the materialistic explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes. Moreover, that materialism is absolute for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. They don't want an outside cause. They want all the cause inside the universe, and they're not going to let anything that points to the creator God that they might have to answer to one day as part of the investigation. Professor Adam Siegwich of Cambridge, the foremost geologist of the day, recognized this as soon as he read The Origin, that's Darwin's story, about 1861. He wrote, "From first to last, it is a dish of rank materialism, cleverly cooked and served up. And why is this done? For no other reason, I am sure, except to make us independent of a creator." And he saw this in 1861. It's still a materialistic um, idea, and we see from this quote from Jonathan Wells. According to Darwinists, there is such overwhelming evidence for their view that it should be considered a fact. The truth is, Darwinism is not a scientific theory, but a materialistic creation myth masquerading as science. It is first and foremost a weapon against religion, especially traditional Christianity. Evidence is brought in afterwards as window dressing. This is becoming increasingly obvious to the American people who are not the ignorant backwoods religious dogmatists that Darwinists make them out to be. Darwinists insult the intelligence of the American taxpayers and at the same time depend on them for support. This is an inherently unstable situation and it cannot last. If I was a Darwinist, I'd be afraid, very afraid. Well, he points out, I don't know how afraid they're going to be. Well, they should be afraid when Jesus comes or when they die, but I think he's absolutely right that it is materialistic creation myth with science as a window dressing. Philip Johnson says, for the scientific materialist, the materialist comes first, the science comes thereafter. We might therefore miraculously term them materialists employing science. And if materialism is true, then some materialistic theories of evolution has to be true simply as a matter of logical deduction, regardless of the evidence. So that's it. Evolution's a fact, so DNA had to come from material. That's a fact too. So here we're going to start off with a little bit of side information, but God's signature in every cell of the human body. And then DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. Yeah, 4 nucleic acids bind the helixes together by sulfuric bridges in the sequence of ATCG. So you see how they're twisted, the DNA, and then he's got these letter rungs in between, and that's sulfuric acid, and they're spread out. They're 10 different sections, and then 5, and then 6, and then 5, and then 10. It keeps repeating that all through the whole human DNA. Well, take those letters and put it to the Hebrew alphabet, and it spells out YHVH, which is how they spell Yahweh, and God's signature is all through human DNA. There's no reason why it should be 10.5.6.5. It's interesting. I think God gave it to us so that we could figure it out. There's another thing that's a book written by the God Code, A Secret of Our Past, Promise of the Future. It's by Greg Braden, and what he was, he's got a PhD in decoding things, and he worked for the military intelligence, and he decodes things. And what he tried to do is decode the DNA, and what he looked at is the periodic table and got all the chemicals in the first part of human DNA and tried to figure out something else. He worked on it for a long time. He finally found that 3 ancient languages had secret code numbers for each one of their alphabet, and he connected them all together, and here's what he came up with. In Hebrew, it came up at the beginning of all the human genome, God eternal within. He did it in Aramaic, it was God eternal within, and in Sanskrit, God eternal within. Seems like God had a message in DNA there, and it's pretty uh, uh, pretty interesting. I don't think this all could happen by chance. So, according to leading atheist professor Richard Dawkins, the most compelling evidence for evolution is found in DNA. In his book, The Greatest Show on Earth, he states that the DNA code is, that is, the DNA language is the same in all life forms, a fact, he claims, that shows more clearly than anything else that all living creatures are descended from a single ancestor. That's just one way to look at it. That's a materialistic assumption. But if you realize how did it get there metaphysically, I don't think you would think that. And this statement, however, is very misleading, as there are a number of exceptions to this fact. Some creatures use a variation of the code. Moreover, these exceptions, along with the nature of the code itself, actually provide one of the strongest arguments against evolution. So their best evidence is actually evidence for the Creator God. Nathaniel Jensen says the evolutionary case from genetics is unraveling at multiple levels because it was never based on any direct evidence for common ancestry in the first place. So it's all falling apart, and he recognized that. He's a PhD in cell and developmental biology at Harvard University. Darwin is a quote from his book, page 154. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, then my theory would absolutely break down. Well, DNA coding is so complex that there is no computer program that comes close to matching it. In fact, the whole internet could be stored inside 1 gram of DNA, and all that fits inside a shoebox. That's all the information. DNA is truly amazing. DNA is found in every cell of our bodies in at least some stage of a development, and has a beautiful appearance, having the shape of a spiral staircase. The steps or rungs are like letters in our alphabet, and ascending and descending the staircase, the letters taken together spell words which have meanings. Altogether, there are over 3 billion letters in human DNA, which amounts to a lot of information. I think the spiral part of it shows that there's electricity involved. Uh, Nikola Tesla says energy is always rotational, and I think the RNA that spins so fast is from electrical, and that's how it gets so um, rotational. And anyway, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later. But here's a fact. If I'd ask you how far all the DNA in your body stretched into it, how far would it be? I think maybe you'd guess around the world, maybe. Well, it says here that there is enough DNA in an average person's body to stretch from the sun to Pluto and back 17 times. And Pluto is quite a ways out there. And that is truly amazing. You have about 6 feet of DNA in each one of your cells, and you have like 60 trillion cells in your body, and that's how long it all would be. Another quote here about DNA: 1 gram of DNA can hold as much information as 1 trillion CDs. Stated another way, this information storage system is so efficient that a microscopic speck smaller than a dust particle could hold a copy of every high-resolution movie ever produced, with space to spare for every movie made for the next 100 years. It's truly, truly amazing. The human genome, this is from Wikipedia. I see incredible, intelligent design. Analogy to the human genome stored on the DNA is that of instructions stored in a book. The book genome would contain 23 chapters, chromosomes. Each chapter contains 48 to 250 million letters, ACGT, without spaces. Hence, the book contains over 3.2 billion letters total. The book fits into a cell nucleus the size of a pinpoint. At least one copy of the book, all 23 chapters, is contained in most of our cells in the body. So another incredible thing. So how much is a billion, just so we know? People don't know how much bigger a billion is than a million. A billion seconds is about 11 days. 1 billion seconds is about 31.5 years. So it's a lot bigger, according to what I've found here. And so people don't realize how big a billion is. Craig Venter: all living cells that we know of on this planet are DNA software, driven biological machines comprised of hundreds of thousands of protein robots coded for by the DNA that carry out precise functions. So the DNA, it has all kinds of function. The part that they thought it was junk has all kinds of function. There is no junk DNA that they know of. And so this DNA is programmed for making new proteins, but also there's all these biological machines, and there's 300 different kinds of these machines and thousands of them inside each cell, and they need these for the cell to operate, and it's totally amazing. And the DNA does so much more. It sends information and it receives information to other cells, and from a central location. There's so much that it does. One of the functions of DNA is to control the manufacture of the many proteins needed to maintain a healthy body. The protein hemoglobin in our blood, for example, must be very carefully constructed so that it can efficiently transport oxygen from the lungs to various parts of the body. Some proteins act as antibodies, enabling us to fight off illnesses caused by bacteria and viruses. I'm interested in the hemoglobin because I had some problem with low hemoglobin, and last summer I went to Colorado. We were 9,000 feet up in the air. I couldn't get my breath. Well, we found out I had low hemoglobin, and it wasn't fun. But thank God I got my hemoglobin back, and now I can handle low oxygen. Former atheist and most famous atheist of the 20th century renounced his atheism because of DNA information. How can a universe of mindless matter produce beings with intrinsic ends, self-replicating capabilities, encoded chemistries? He came to the conclusion that it wasn't inside the universe, there was an outside source. I don't know if he came up with the right outside source or not, but he realized the material universe just doesn't cut it. He's passed away, Anthony Flew. The sequence of DNA letters is a language where different combinations of letters have different meanings whereas the English alphabet has 26 letters. The DNA alphabet has just 4, A, C, T, and G. Using these 4 letters, the DNA specifies which amino acid is to be placed in each position along the chain when it's reproducing new DNA. For example, in DNA language, the word comprising the letters CAT means use amino acid histidine. The letter GGT means use amino acid glycine. The letter GTG means use the amino acid valine. A series of such words specifies the sequence in which the amino acid must be assembled. So CATGGTGTG mean assemble using histidine first, then glycine, then valine. And so it has all this information in the DNA and it sends this information so that the RNA can properly assemble the over 3 billion different ACTGs. We have only to see a few letters of the alphabet spelling our name in the sand to recognize at once the work of an intelligent agent. How much more likely, then, is the existence of an intelligent creator behind the human DNA, the colossal biological database that contains no fewer than 3.5 billion letters, the longest word yet discovered? And that's from John Lennox. And so it points to an intelligent creator, is what he said. And if you found those letters on the beach, you'd say, no, this didn't come by chance from the material world. This was by an intelligent source. And this is a higher level of intelligence. When they send out information, it's received and it acts on that. So that's the highest level of communication, and that shows that it has to have come from an intelligent source and it couldn't have come from matter. Dr. Marcos Berlin, as a biochemist, I became most skeptical about Darwinianism when I was confronted with the extreme intricacy of the genetic code and its many most intelligent strategies to code, decode, and protect its information, such as the U times T and the ribose times deoxyribose exchange for the DNA RNA pair in the translation of its 4-base language into the 20A language of life that absolutely relies on a diversity of exquisite molecular machines made by the products of such translation, forming a chicken and egg dilemma that evolution has no chance at all to answer. He's telling us that it couldn't have happened by the material world. And there are many characteristics of the DNA code that make it very sophisticated. One of these is the way it accommodates copying errors. Just as when a piece of software, a computer copies data from the hard drive to the memory, so DNA must be copied before being used. The copy is actually in a slightly different molecule called RNA. Copying errors occur which can result in amino acids being assembled to the wrong position in the chain. However, the DNA language has been configured so as to minimize the effect of such errors. For example, the design of the code is such that even if the error occurs in the selection of an incorrect amino acid, the one selected will often have similar characteristics and so will work as well or almost as well as the correct one. In other words, an error will still result in the correct amino acid being selected. So it makes a mistake, and these are neutral mutations. Actually, the RNA it will recognize when it makes a mistake and stop and go back. And the molecular machines, there's 3 different types and hundreds of these. They'll go over the DNA and will fix the mutation, and that's what they're programmed to do. And the problem is when you have mutations and your body has a low voltage, then those machines don't work so well, the RNA doesn't work so well. That's when you get some bad mutations. So that's something else we'll talk about another time, but that's my theory of that. And Jeff Tompkins from ICR, one of the biggest problems for evolution, how life got started, because you need DNA to make proteins, you need DNA to make RNA, and you need RNA to make proteins. So it's worse than what came first, the chicken or the egg. And Lee Spetner, all point mutations have been studied on the molecular level, turn out to reduce the genetic information, not increase it. So it basically stays the same, but it's not going to be quite as good, even if it's got a near miss. Some evolutionists claim that the natural selection can explain how the DNA language became optimized. They say that over millions of years, mutations would have produced changes to the code, and each time this gave rise to an improved code. Survival of the fittest would have resulted in this becoming a new code. The idea that mutations could produce a new workable code, however, is absurd. It would be like changing the position of some keys on a computer keyboard, without a simultaneous change in the software that associates the key with the letters. Numerous words would then be misspelled. It's not logical. It doesn't work practically. It's just wishful thinking of materialistic philosophy. Improbability of natural DNA RNA formation. It would be a miracle if a strand of RNA ever appeared on the primitive Earth. That's Leslie Orgel. You have to build a straw man upon straw man to get to the point where RNA is a viable first biomolecule. It's harder to form than protein and amino acids. No nucleotides from plausible Miller-Urey type experiments. It just couldn't, the proteins and amino acids couldn't come together, and they assume that they have come together. Hard to form the molecule's backbone due to rareness of phosphates. Other molecules could easily bond with ribose or the phosphates. Inability to produce ribose without hundreds of other sugars, acceptive of only right-handed ribose, no left-handed will be accepted. Ribose in solution has half-life about only 1 to 2 hours, so it have to all happen very quickly, and that's just not very possible if it slowly came together. Water breaks down nucleic acid, UV rays, metabolism, byproducts cause lesions. Hard to form nucleotide. 2 bases form only in near freezing temperatures. Other 2 bases form only in near boiling temperatures. So how did they all 4 come together at the same time? And what were there at the same time? It just doesn't make sense. Hard to chain together components without other chemicals mixing in. So how did it start metaphysically? It couldn't have started by materialistic causes. Interesting, Professor Richard Dawkins is aware of these difficulties. In his book, The Greatest Show on Earth, he wrote, any mutation in the genetic code would have an instantly catastrophic effect, not just in one place, but throughout the whole organism. If any word changed its meaning so that it came to specify a different amino acid, just about every protein in the body would instantly change. Unlike an ordinary mutation, which might, say, slightly lengthen a leg or shorten a wing or darken an eye, a change in genetic code would change everything at once all over the body, and this would spell disaster. So he spells it out, and just that this materialist idea that it came together slowly just doesn't make sense. Scientific theories versus observations. Fact, DNA is lost each and every generation. Where's the evolution in that? Things are winding down. They aren't winding up like the materialists would like them to be. Given that there are millions of possible codes, those who argue that natural selection optimized the code must believe in nature performing miracles. The only way this could have worked is if again and again the multiple mutations simultaneously change much of the DNA all at once and at the same time, change the way the machinery used to make the protein interpreted the new code. Moreover, since virtually all organisms throughout the nature use the same code, this optimized process must have occurred very, very early on in the evolutionary story, thus severely limiting the time available for all these miracles to happen. So the theory of evolution violates the mathematic probability. The probability of just one DNA arranging itself by chance is calculated to be 1 in 10 to the 119,000. How they do this is the law of probability, and they go the first spot, there's 4 different chances you'll have the right protein there, and so it's 1 out of 4. The second one is 1 out of 4 for that one, but then having the right one for both of those out of the 4 and 4, you have to multiply 4 times 4, so that'll only happen once every 16 times. So every time you go to another spot in the DNA, you multiply by 4, and what happens after you go to 3.5 billion, it's 10 to the 119,000, and that's 1 with 119,000 zeros behind it, and that's just beyond impossible. The entire visible universe is 10 to the 28 inches in diameter, so that shows how many. And even that 10 to the 119, you assume that all the proteins are already there. And that's another huge problem. And so it just is all impossible that it came together by chance. Human DNA contains more organized information than the Encyclopedia Britannica. If the full text of the encyclopedia were to arrive in a computer code from outer space, most people would regard this as proof of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. But when seen in nature, it is explained as the working of random forces of the material world. That's George Sim Johnson. Bill Gates, quote, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. DNA is beyond amazing. This is Jerry Bergman, who's our friend. According to evolutionists, natural processes somehow cause ordinary chemicals to come together so as to produce DNA in all the machinery needed to read it and manufacture complex proteins. Nobody has ever shown such a thing to be possible, but scientists who say they don't believe this often face considerable hostility. So if they say, oh, this couldn't have come together by chance, basically, if they dare to say that, they're going to have all kinds of problems, basically, is what he's saying. Another quote from B. Stein, similarly, those who openly question the ability of Darwinian process to optimize the DNA code risks, opposition, and discrimination. They're going to have this stuff. They're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their salary. They're going to lose their ego. And they're going to be in a lot of trouble with the rest of the scientific world if they dare to say this. And dear evolutionists, from Danish Shabir, if evolution is true, why DNA is still DNA? Why is it not another form? Why don't we see it continue to change forms? Junk DNA, I talked a little bit about it. They thought that this was all evidence of evolution. And now another bit of evidence for evolution. They thought 98% of the genome was junk. Now they know at least 70% is usable. I think it's going to be more than that when they keep finding out more. And their evidence of junk DNA, of how it came together by chance, they said, oh, this is evidence of all the bad mutations in the past, all this 98%. And this is excellent evidence of evolution. Well, another icon of evolution falls. In a recent paper titled Dissecting Darwinism, Baylor University Medical Center surgeon Joseph Kuhn describes serious problems with Darwinian evolution. This was an article he wrote in Dissecting Darwinianism. And he first described how life could not possibly have come from chemicals alone, since the information residing in DNA requires an input from outside of nature. He's a great detective. He's looking for the outside source. He's absolutely right. And so he's a surgeon who works here in Dallas, I believe. As a medical doctor, Kuhn not only knows the general arrangement of the human body's visible parts, he also understands the interrelated biochemical systems that sustain and regulate all those parts. He recognized that the human body contains an all or nothing system in which its core parts and biochemicals must exist all at once for the body to function. And that's true. It couldn't have fallen together by parts and had to all be there at the same time, same thing as DNA. And Kuhn wrote that virtually every aspect of the human physiology has regulatory elements, feedback loops, and developmental components that require thousands of interacting genes leading to specified protein expressions. Thus, the human body represents an irreducibly complex system on a cellular level and an organ system basis. He talks about more than the DNA, he talks about the whole thing. It had to have an outside source. And so there you go, Mr. Darwin. Kuhn cites the work of another medical doctor, Jeffrey Simmons, who described 17 all or nothing human body systems. These combine with many others to form the entire human body, a system of systems that is incredible at many levels, the gross anatomy to the biochemistry. For example, just as a woman would die without her heart, she would also die without the vital blood biochemical hemoglobin. And there's my hemoglobin again. I put it in there. Kuhn wrote that virtually every aspect of human physiology has regulatory elements, feedbacks, and loops, and developmental components that required thousands of interacting genes leading to a specified protein expression. Thus, the human body represents an irreducible complex system on a cellular and an organ system basis. This is great. Another little piece I added to the DNA case. Psalm 119, 319, verse 14, David wrote, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And this is surely true. The God who made us has meticulously down to fine details of tiny DNA molecules and protein manufacturing machinery in our cells. He designed the system, assigned an optimal code, and programmed the first groups of living cells. Moreover, that this code is used by virtually all creatures clearly makes clear that life came from just one designer, as the Bible teaches. It all came from one. It just didn't come from different little green men or something like that. It all came from Jehovah God Almighty, the Creator God. Dr. Chris Williams, PhD biochemist. Few people outside of genetics or biochemistry realize that evolutionists still can provide no substantive detail at all about the origin of life and practically the origin of genetic information in the first self-replicating organism. What genes did it require, or did it even have genes? How much DNA and RNA did it have, or did it even have nucleic acids? How did huge information-rich molecules arise before natural selection? Exactly how did the genetic code linking nucleic acid to amino acid sequence originate? Clearly, the original of life, the foundation of evolution, is still virtually all speculation and little, if no, fact. They just have no idea metaphysically how it all came together. Here's evolutionary biologist Sir Julian Huxley, grandson of Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, eagerly proclaimed, in the evolutionary pattern of thought, there is no longer either need or room for the supernatural. The earth was not created, it evolved, so did all the animals and the plants that inhabit it, including our human selves, mind and soul, as well as our brain and body, and so did religion. This is how the materialists think. He was a great materialist. Anthony Flew, it seems now to me that findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design something outside the universe. And he's the former atheist again. That's just how they think, and he's put down by another atheist who realized that there had to be something outside the material world. So a quote here, imagine, if you will, an atheist detective shows up to a potential crime scene and says, there is no evidence of foul play. When asked what would consider to be evidence of foul play, he would respond by saying, I don't know. And let me give you an example. It's actually something that happened here in Texas a long time ago. But a guy, he committed suicide, and they found a bolt action rifle next to him, and he had been shot in the head 15 times. Well, the detective came out, and he was a friend of a political figure, and this guy was an enemy of the political figure, and he said, it's the worst case of suicide I ever saw. Well, anybody with half a brain knows a bolt-action rifle, you're not going to shoot yourself in the head. If you could, you couldn't do it more than once. 14 times? Well, that's basically the evolutionists are thinking like that detective did back then. Anybody with half a brain could see that was a homicide. It was from an outside cause. He included it as an inside cause, and that was a very bad detective. And I'll tell you, the materialistic philosophers are all very bad detectives. Joseph Stin, a Romanian Baptist pastor imprisoned for his faith under the communist regime, testified from his own experience. I came to the conclusion that there are two factors which destroyed Christianity in Western Europe. One was the theory of evolution, the other, liberal theology. Liberal theology is just evolution applied to the Bible and our faith. So basically, it's taking on materialism and adding it to the Bible, and that's called theistic evolution. And why is Christianity dying in our country? Because so many Christians believe in theistic evolution, and so many secularists think that evolution is a fact. And I tell you, we got to get to our young people and show them the facts and show them the evidence. I gave you some great evidence tonight. Jonathan Wells, when you analyze all the most current affirmative evidence that cosmology, physics, and astronomy, biology, and so forth, the positive case for an intelligent designer becomes absolutely compelling. It didn't all come from inside the universe, it had an outside source. William Lane Craig, the Christian faith does not call for us to put our minds on the shelf, to fly in the face of common sense and history, or to make a leap of faith into the dark. The rational person, fully appraised of the evidence, can confidently believe. And I think he's right, and I think I made a good case tonight for a reason to believe. And remember, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31, the purpose of life is to glorify God. The heavens declare the glory of God. Creation declares the glory of God. We have to declare the glory of God. And when you accept these theistic evolution, you're taking away glory from God. And God doesn't appreciate it. And it's sad. And we have to be ready to make the case against it. Psalm 11, verse 3, if the fountains are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, the fountains are the foundations are Genesis 1 through 11. All our Christian doctrines are based on Genesis 1 through 11. Those origin stories there. So what do we do if the foundations are being destroyed? We are called to be earnest contenders for the faith. And that's from Jude chapter 3. We got to be earnest contenders for the faith. This is not a call to be contentious, even mean-spirited, or looking for an argument. And the Spirit of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility correcting those who are opposition, if God will perhaps grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth. And that's 2 Timothy chapter 2. And we must speak the truth in love. And that's a very important thing. Ephesians 4, verse 15. Harsh, unloving use of the truth of God is not edifying to man or glorifying to God. So even I've learned this actually, and Jesus called somebody a friend. So whenever I'm debating on social media, I'd say somebody would say horrible things to me, and I'd say, I'm sorry if I upset you, my friend, and God bless you, and, and I'll give my response. So you don't want to get into an argument and you come back with kind words and you pour sauce on their face, basically. And so basically the conclusion, Darwinian evolution is unscientific, unobservable, unbelievable, but understandable to a world that hates God. Okay, questions and